All right, we're here to do a real special video today here at Rock Creek Cemetery here in DC. We're right across the street from the U.S. Soldiers Cemetery, DC, and the Soldiers Home, United States Soldiers Home, DC. And I live right down the street. By the way, I'm the leading archivist researcher in this area about all things when it comes to Rock Creek Cemetery, U.S. Soldiers Cemetery, and the Soldiers Home. I know more than the historians. Many of the stuff, much of the stuff in the books are wrong, and I've straightened it out. But today we're going to have a cool video. As if you follow my channel, you know I'm really into Abraham Lincoln, the civil insurrection. Some people use the word war. I don't think it was a war. They were not a sovereign nation. But this has a connection to both Lincoln and the civil insurrection. I'm gonna show you the whereabouts and all the facts, straighten the facts out there about Lewis Powell, one of the conspirators in the Abraham Lincoln assassination plot. He attacked Seward. I'll get into all that, all the details about where his remains were. People say there's a mystery. No, people just get confused, and they got themselves confused. I'm here to straighten it all out. So we're about to go into Rock Creek Cemetery, where his headless remains lie in a mass grave. So let's head into Section K, Rock Creek Cemetery in DC. And as we walk along, I will tell you good stories about the area and stuff like that. For instance, I was the one who found out that in the 1930s, the old entrance was down there, and then they moved the gate up here to allow for the new lights, and they were paving the roads. We went from macadam gravel to paved roads and stuff here. So they closed the Harewood Road exit and then moved the gate all the way down to here. And so anyways, I'm always, I've been covering a lot of notable burials here in Rock Creek Cemetery. There's tons of them. I've done Upton Sinclair. Check my channel and everything. And I got tons of videos on the Soldier Cemetery. Spent a lot of time there. The way I solved the mystery of the gate is I found a picture before 1930 of this stone was in the background. This stone, as a matter of fact, this stone came from Ireland, by the way, and brought over here and put there. The thing's been there since late 1800s. So, but anyways, we're here to visit a plot for an infamous guy. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history as we walk there. We're going to Section K, and so, oops, I headed the wrong way. So I'm going to take a little shortcut through my friends. Nice and peaceful out here, by the way. When people say it's creepy, I don't know. I find it peaceful. But anyways, the Lewis Powell was born in 1844 in Alabama. And he joined the insurrection around 16. He'd lie about his age. Couldn't find somebody to help him. He ended up going to Louisiana and joining a mob there. And so I'm going to go over here to the main drive over here, and we're going to head down there to Section K. I'm going to pause to get past this lawnmower. Too much noise, so stand by. So there's the old chapel, church. It's been updated throughout the centuries, the decades, but it's been there for a while. I see it in pictures going way, way back. And it's got a nice commanding hill. There's really old 1700 graves over here, and they're labeled, section A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and onward. We're headed to Section K, and give you a nice view there. There's Fort Totten, which was a fort during the civil insurrection over there. Got tons of videos on this cemetery, by the way. Check my shorts and shorts videos. And so we're gonna head over to Section K, and I'm gonna tell you all about Lewis Powell. All right, we are here at Section K, the infamous Section K in Rock Creek Cemetery, DC. Let me give you a little background. Like I said, I'm here to clear up a lot of confusion around Lewis Powell's remains, where they ended up. They actually ended up in two places. I'll get to that. But anyways, Lewis Powell, he was a total racist, so he loved the insurrection. He was all in. Like I said, he was born in Alabama in 1844, and in 1861, of course, he was like around 16, lied about his age, went around, finally went down to Louisiana and found some kind of militia mob, civilian insurrectionist mob thing to go up to Gettysburg, attack the U.S. Army to try to preserve slavery and take half the republic with them, maybe completely. Who knows what would have happened? Maybe, England, France came in, and the whole, we would have been weaker, so they could have completely killed America. People got to remember that. America was, just in its teenage years and was stumbling. They might have fallen. We might have fallen, but luckily our republic is still around thanks to the U.S. Army. No thanks to the insurrectionists. So, but anyways, in 1861, like I said, he joined a Louisiana militia thing and went up to Gettysburg, got injured, and was discharged. And he wandered around, and they ended up with a group of criminals called the Mosby's Rangers. And they were basically war criminals. They would, do whatever, attack civilians, do raids, do whatever. They didn't take prisoners, especially African-American U.S. colored troops. They would just execute them, total war crimes. He was horrible. He was noted to have Lewis Powell was noted to have a temper. He had, drank booze, I'm sure. He had fits of rage. And but by 1864, he knew, and everybody knew, that the war was over by 1864. I mean, we closed down in Mississippi, Vicksburg. After the siege of Vicksburg, and Vicksburg fell, they were closed in. They couldn't get anything in. The people were starving. They had no supplies, nothing. But the fool in Richmond kept it going, just like the corporal in 1945. Was sending kids and old men out for the last few battles. It was horrible. And but anyways, he was very disillusioned. He was hanging around Richmond. He was very disillusioned. He knew he was won, so he quit Mosby's Rangers, put on civilian clothes, lied his way, saying he was from the North, and made it through Union lines into Maryland. And Lewis Powell joined up with the so-called Confederate Secret Service and did spying and war crimes and stuff in Maryland for a little while. He would drift back and forth through the lines, go to D.C. and come back, because the line was kind of south of D.C. So you can go from Maryland to D.C. pretty easily. And so he would come into D.C. for a while, and one time Lewis Powell was walking by the White House, and I think it was the South Porch. Abraham Lincoln was giving an address. The war was winding down, and the talk was actually turning into how do we get the Union back? These states, how do we get them back? Because all their senators and U.S. representatives were not allowed in Congress. They were put on probation, parole, and until they came up with a new state constitution, and then they would eventually be brought back into the Union. And so Abraham Lincoln was talking about, he thought Louisiana would be a good first state to come back into the Union. Half of it was still loyal to the Union, like some states, and so they even had black militia loyal to the U.S. that weren't fighting for the Confederacy. That's where people get confused, where they see troops in the South dressed with military garb. That was local guard to protect their neighborhoods. Local state militia had nothing to do with the Confederacy. The blacks would not fight to keep themselves enslaved. That's absolutely insane to suggest. But anyways, like I said, he was disillusioned, and he heard Abraham Lincoln speaking on the South Porch about bidding Louisiana back, and then Abraham Lincoln said, you know, he would entertain the notion of we got to start talking about maybe giving voting rights to the newly freed, formerly enslaved African Americans. And of course, to a racist like, you know, a Confederate racist like Lewis Powell, he exploded with rage. He wanted to, just like when Booth was at the second inaugural address and heard Lincoln, and he exploded. Same thing with Powell. He heard this little speech, informal speech off the South Porch. He exploded. He wanted to kill Lincoln, so he started hanging around people, and eventually met with Booth, who also wanted to try to kill Lincoln. And he had formed a plan to try to kill Lincoln a little bit before the Ford's Theater thing all by himself. And as a connection to the Soldiers' Home I just showed, is he heard one night, it was a few days before the Ford's Theater, that he was going to come here to the U.S. Soldiers' Home, where Abraham Lincoln's summer cottage is there, by the way. So, and he loved hanging around by the Soldiers' Home. And so he was going to go there for some kind of a play or theater matinee performance of some kind at the Soldiers' Home. So he was ready to go there and attack Lincoln. And Lincoln was shot at once coming out of the Soldiers' Home, also another time. But turns out the last minute, Abraham Lincoln went to a hotel where a bunch of U.S. soldiers were staying at, and he went there to entertain the troops and get morale boosted. And so his plans fell through. So he got with Booth, and at first Booth wanted to kidnap Lincoln, take him down south, but then he decided, nah, it's too much. They said, let's just assassinate the president, vice president, secretary of state. And so the plans were made to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, the greatest president ever, and the vice president, Andrew Johnson the Drunk, the worst vice president ever, and Seward, the secretary of state, which was a good guy, by the way. He helped Harriet Tubman get some land. Harriet Tubman sent flowers to his funeral. He's a good guy, Seward. So anyways, he dispatched Seward to dispatch Powell to go attack Seward, kill Seward. And so he ran off. He went off with this one guy, and they got to Seward's house that night. And he bursted in, and he started fighting, attacking. He injured one of his brother, burst in the room, attacked Seward, who was recovering from a carriage accident or something. And his other brother came in, and black someone came, he stabbed him. He ended up stabbing like 4 or 5 people, but he knew he was about to be subdued, and so he ran out the door and he ran. And Seward's house, of course, is downtown, about 9 miles from here. I'm way at the northern part of the District of Columbia. And he made it about like I said, about 6, 7, 8, 9 miles up here to Bunker Hill Fort area, which is near the Turkey Thicket Recreation Area currently. And there's still a Civil War Fort Park area called Bunker Hill. And there was some kind of local cemetery there, and he hid in a vault similar to the one behind me. He hid in a vault for 2 days and was hungry and stuff like that. So he decided to make it back to Mary Surratt's house, remember the house where they planned the assassination, the conspiracy. And he got to the house, and police were surrounding the house, and he came walking in. They said, "Who are you?" And they were arresting, dozens, hundreds of people or so, trying to find out who was it. And of course, eventually, after a few days, they found out he was Lewis Powell, the guy who attacked Seward and everything. They locked him up. And since he was such this small circle of 10 people at the end, they put them all on a monitor in the Chesapeake Bay, in the Potomac River, because no way to escape. I mean, they were on a boat way out in the thing. And then eventually they moved them, preparing for the trial, to the Washington Penitentiary. And so they held him there, and for a few months, 6 months, 10 months, and they eventually had the trial, and he was found guilty of being part of the conspiracy to kill the greatest president ever. And so on July 7th, 1865, Mr. Lewis Powell was hanged by the neck until he was dead. And he swayed in the hot DC summer weather for 30 minutes till they took his body down. And then they took his remains, and they were all put in nondescript boxes and buried along the wall of the Washington Penitentiary. And each body, they put a glass vial, a little strip of paper with the person's name, and they put it in there, and closed it, and they were sealed there. And then about 1867, about 2 years later, they they took his body and they moved him to like another section of the penitentiary yard or something like that, where he laid for about another year or so. And then finally, about 1869, 1870, the president, was it Garfield or something? One of the president at the time finally put pressure on the families. You know, John Wilkes Booth, all these families wanted to say, and all the other conspirators wanted the remains of their family remains back. And finally, okay. So in 1870, the remains of the conspirators were released to their families. Well, the Powell's family did not claim his remains. And so they, a guy named Ahgawler, Gawler, was, and just a real small circle of military personnel were privy to where his remains were going to be relocated to. And this is where the confusion lies, and this is where I'm going to straighten it out, okay? In 1870, when he was moved over to Holmead's Burial Ground, Holmead''s, Holmead's Burial Ground. And it's about 5-6 miles from here, north of the DuPont Circle area. And it was just a kind of a secular burial ground, a very confusing place, because some people, I was reading that during the night, people would sneak in there and do secret burials because they couldn't pay for it. They didn't want to get the licenses and all that stuff. Some of them would pay the cemetery ground person who was in charge of the burials. They would slip in money on the side and maybe do a secret burial. So there was a lot of records. It got really crazy. So the city decided to start shutting it down. And so they, of course, just back then, the cemeteries were segregated. They had the Caucasian section, and then they had the African section, black section, and then they had a section for, believe it or not, and I'll get to this in a little while in my video, which is pretty cool. They had a section for the War of 1812 veterans, and in one corner. So they, the blacks were relocated to Graceland Cemetery, about 5-6 miles over in that direction, where Mount Olivet Cemetery was, a cemetery just south of Mount Olivet Cemetery, now where the Heckinger Mall is. Those were, the blacks were moved over there, about 1,200, anybody's guess, it was crazy, about 1,200 remains of African blacks were moved over to Graceland Church. And then the white bodies, the Caucasian bodies, about 1,600, were mostly, it was just a mess, jumble of bones sometimes, very grisly. Some no headstone stuff right there. But some, with the headstones, I'll show you, moved over here. But about 1,600 remains were moved over here to a mass unmarked grave right here in Section K. And this is where the confusion lies. People say, oh, Lewis Powell's remains went to Graceland, went over to Holmead, No. There was Graceland was being shut down also. Both those Holmeads and Graceland were both shut down by the city. Poor management, smells, it was just horrible. The people were corrupt. It took years to shut them down, move the body. So there's no way, it is impossible. The line doesn't match up. I've checked it out. I've gone thoroughly, researched this for days, weeks. There's no way that they would allow 2,000 bodies to be moved over to a cemetery that they were trying to shut down and move bodies out of. That doesn't make any sense at all. So any reports of him going over to Graceland is absolutely false. His remains, Lewis Powell's remains, have nothing to do with Graceland Cemetery other than the African American remains at Holmead's Burial Ground, where his remains went to Graceland. The Caucasian bodies went over here to Rock Creek Cemetery, Section K. So, Lewis Powell's remains were there. And his story of his family came up and got his remains and took them to Florida. That is also false. I'll show you why, how that myth came about. So anyways, in about 1870, he was moved, Lewis Powell's remains, to Holmead's Burial Ground. And at that point, his body was whole, as his skull was attached to his body still. And we think at that time, most people think that the strip of paper with his name was taken out and the vial was put back in. Maybe not. Like I said, it's hard to tell. But anyways, his remains lied there, only known to like 2 or 3 people, A.H. Galler and like 2 people in the military, because they didn't want people going after the body and stuff like that. And so it lied there for about 14 years. And on December 16th, 1884, A.H. Galler, who was in charge of the body and everything, knew where it was, knew where the body was buried, as they would say, exhumed his remains because they were trying to empty it out, and they were about to bring him over here to Section K. So he removed the body, and believe it or not, A.H. Galler at this point separated his skull from the body and kept it and donated it to the American Military Museum in around 1885. Yeah, so after a few months or whatever, a year, he eventually gave it to the American Military Museum. His headless remain, the rest of his remains without the skull, were transported with the rest of the bodies, and I don't know if he did a separate thing just for him, or did he just lay it on the remains of the other 1,600 jumbled body, 1,600 remains, mostly jumbles of bones, into the mass cemetery, and just place it along with them. No one knows the details. That went to the grave. You're gonna have to talk to Galler, do a seance and talk to him about the details about that. So like I said, so in 1884, his remains were placed in here. I'm about to show you where it is, and here, and where they have remained to this day. And the reason, now I'll get into the Florida, thing, Geneva, Florida connection. And what happened is in 1991, they were going through all of these Native American skulls at the American Military Museum, trying to return the remains to the Native Americans, and they came upon this one skull which had this thing, and they did some reading. They found out this is the skull of Lewis Powell, it had a P on it and everything. They said, wow, so they found a great niece of Lewis Powell through DNA, whatnot, record stuff. They did, verify the remains, so they released the skull to her. And in 1994, not 1894, in 1994, his skull was given to the niece, and the skull was then placed in near top of the grave, in the same grave or whatever as his mother, Lewis Powell's mother. So his skull is in Geneva, Florida. His body lies in a mass grave behind me here. So that's where the Geneva, Florida connection came in. So, but his remains did not go down there. No, they've always been. They were at Holmead's from 1870 to 1884 for 14 years, and then 1884 to 1885-ish, his remains were put here, and we're gonna go into this right now. And a side note, I'm going to show you right now is there was one section of Holmead's burial ground by DuPont Circle that had it was the west corner, southeast corner. One of the southern corners was a big grave just for the War of 1812 veterans. And they were mostly from Camp Hill, which is where now the U.S. Naval Observatory is. U.S. Naval Observatory is where, because as I've been through this, by the way, I've been through this cemetery hundreds of times, 100 times, know it well. I noticed there was a lot of 1812 veterans, buried right near this mass grave thing. So I found the connection that this was all. They were moved at the same time. They were not buried in a mass grave. Their markers were moved over and everything. I'll show you in a minute now here. So we're going to go into Section K right here, and we're going to look for show you Lot 23, where the mass graves of about 1,600 Caucasian remains from Holmead's burial grounds remains, along with Lewis Powell's headless corpse. And so let's head in. All right, we're here, like I said, Section K, and here he is. You can look him up online, anyone can, but it's Lewis Powell. Right here is one of the conspirators, and you can see we're in Section K right here, Rock Creek Park. And I've gone through beforehand, and I always familiarize myself with the area beforehand, and I found out where space you know, 1, 2, and 3 is. And so, you know, I found out that, you know, over there is where it begins. So we're in Section K, and it's lot 23. So you got lots. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then so about 12 lots, 12 through 24 right here. So, you know, lot 23 is going to be, you know, right around here past this second road right here. And so anyways, as you come in here, one of the things I noticed at first when I came in this area is it's like in a circular area. If you look, all the other burials in Rock Creek Cemetery are all in straight lines, linear. You know, usually like facing the east as for Christian burials or whatever. But these ones, I noticed all of a sudden it's in a circular design, like Stonehenge. As you can see, the circle goes around here. See how the headstones are facing us? You especially see it in this section over here. See how it's in like a Stonehenge fashion? And it's all in a circle. And in the middle of this circle, there's just this big area sitting in here. And, you know, if you go into this area, and it's hard, I can't, you know, I would have to dig this up, and they would get mad if I came out here, but there's markers here, and so I think this is probably the marker for 23. This is all that Lewis Powell gets, is this little thing. I bet it says 23 on the side of this thing if I dug it up, but I'm not going to dig, you know, thing. And you can see it's very mossy area, and there's like a depression right here. If you can see, you know, it's hard. If you can see, there's like a depression right here. It's like in a big bowl, and they're not burying this area. They kept on going past that road, and that's all. You know, they filled down that little bottom of the hill, and then that road was the end of the cemetery until the 1930s, and then they opened it up. But this is the original cemetery. Just went down to that road down there, and down that road down there, and one thing I proved that this is definitely it is they said that the 1812 war veterans were moved over from Holmead's burial ground, and so as we can see, I got 1812 veteran right here. You can see the medallion right there. And more over here. These are all, see how it's in a circular thing? And these are all War of 1812 veterans. So these 1812 war veterans were all at Holmead's burial ground. Another one back there. All of these were at the Holmead's burial ground, and were veteran, because like I said, Holmead's burial ground started in like 1790 or something. It was one of the early cemeteries in DC. So you can see there's some around here dated 1800 and 1820 and stuff like that. And so they're all facing, like I said, all the circulars facing this inward area right here. And it's even got you know, trees are gobbling up, you know, the right here, the tree's gobbling up one of these stones. So this tree's been here for a while. So, you know, basically, you know, right here is the final resting place of Lewis Powell, along with 1,600 other Caucasian remains from Holmead's burial ground. And yeah, see, this might be the 23 marker right here too, one of these stones here. So, and you can see all this loose stone here, you know, so they probably piled gravel on it right here. And like I said, it was a crazy time. I was reading Holmead's Burial Ground, and it, you know, it took 10 years to remove all the bodies, and there were reports that kids would go there bored, and they would pick up arms from the skeletons and wave them around. They picked up skulls and put them on poles and had fun and laughed, and so I mean, hardly any records kept, so that's what's where the confusion. But no, Age Galler was a guy, worked for the government. He kept tabs of that body, and we know where it was. It was Holmead's Burial Ground, then it came here. It never went to Graceland Cemetery, because that's where the African-American bodies went to, and it never went to Florida. His skull went to Florida, but not his body. So Lewis Powell's remains right here. Straighten everything out. Aren't you glad I make these videos? These historians, they think that. Don't read, just because you read something in a historian book or you read it on a webpage somewhere, you know, don't automatically assume it. I've read some things that are printed by the National Park Service and turned out to be, false. They didn't do their research enough. So, 89% of history is correct, but there's a lot that they got wrong. So, do the research. I've been to the U.S. National Archives. I've been to the D.C. People's Archive Library. I've looked over photographs of this place. I've talked to people who worked here in the 50s and stuff. I've devoted my life to research, so I can guarantee you 100% accuracy that Lewis Powell's headless remains lie right here in Section K in this mass grave, along with 1,600 other people. So appreciate it. Thanks for the support, and if you can help me out, please, at Craig Gillette, PayPal, appreciate it. Thanks.